S-P-E-A-K. Everybody wanna sing. Speak up. S-P-E-A-K. Speak up.
Safety in the hills.
Well, in case all this talk about mountaineering and the open-air life tempts you to go out on the hills yourself, here's some timely advice on how not to run the kind of risks that can get you into trouble. From Tim Barrow. Tim, what advice would you give?
Well, above all, you've got to use your common sense and not try to do what you're not trained to do. First of all, for example, you shouldn't set out into the hills by yourself. That's the worst thing you can do. It's best to have at least 4 people in the party so that 2 can go for help if someone is injured, while the third person stays with the person who's hurt.
Oh, that sounds as if you expect everyone to hurt themselves, Tim.
Haha, no, of course not. But you've got to be careful.
Yes.
If you take precautions, then you're going to enjoy your walking. You should expect, for example, bad weather.
Yes.
You shouldn't rely on the accuracy of weather forecasts because things can change very, very quickly. You give yourself plenty of time to get where you're going to go, and especially, to take into account darkness so that it doesn't catch you up and leave you still out in the hills.
Yes.
Don't leave anyone behind. You should walk as slowly as the slowest walker. Now, if the visibility does get bad due to fog or low-lying cloud, the best thing is not to go on walking. Stop and wait for it to get better. Otherwise, you might walk over a precipice or something horrendous like that. You need to take, most important this, a map and compass, because it can be disastrous if you try and follow your nose and expect your sense of direction to get you anywhere.
Yes. And how about clothes and equipment?
Well, crucial. You've got to take precautions, be prepared for the wet, even if when you start out it looks warm and sunny. You just can't assume that it's going to stay that way. So take warm clothes and waterproof ones at that. Next, you should take proper walking boots, not sandals, things like that, and not jeans, which, yes, I know lots of people wear jeans, but they just don't protect you against the wind or the rain. Another important thing, before you set out, you should actually let people know where you're going and what time you'll be back.
Yes.
Then, if you do get into difficulties, you've got a chance of being rescued. And very important, when you do get back, to report that you've arrived safely back. Otherwise, everyone will be terribly worried. That's very important.
Yes. Well, that's good advice. Thanks, Tim.
Napoleon Bonaparte's ambition to control all the area around the Mediterranean Sea led him and his French soldiers to Egypt. After losing a naval battle, they were forced to remain there for 3 years. In 1799, while constructing a fort, a soldier discovered a piece of stele, stone pillar bearing an inscription, known as the Rosetta Stone. This famous stone, which would eventually lead to the deciphering of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics dating to 3100 BC, was written in 3 languages: hieroglyphics, picture writing, Demotic, a shortened version of hieroglyphics, and Greek. Scientists discovered that the characters, unlike those in English, could be written from right to left and in other directions as well. 23 years after discovery of the Rosetta Stone, Jean-François Champollion, a French philologist fluent in several languages, was able to decipher the first word, Ptolemy, name of an Egyptian ruler. This name was written inside an oval called a cartouche. Further investigation revealed that cartouches contained names of important people of that period. Champollion painstakingly continued his search and was able to increase his growing list of known phonetic signs. He and an Englishman, Thomas Young, worked independently of each other to unravel the deeply hidden mysteries of this strange language. Young believed that sound values could be assigned to the symbols, while Champollion insisted that the pictures represented words.
A Japanese adventurer.
Among the most remarkable of all the present-day adventurers is the Japanese Naomi Uemura. Bob MacArthur's been looking at his career. Bob,
Yes, that's right, Sue. Well, Mr. Uemura is certainly a remarkable man. In his life, he's achieved a number of firsts for the record books. But to begin with, here's a short biography. He was born in 1941. He was the youngest of 7 children. And in university, he achieved a degree in agriculture. But at the same time, I suppose he developed his taste for climbing mountains, especially alone. After he got his degree, he traveled to America with only $100 in his pocket. Anyway, he eventually made his way to Europe, and first of all, he climbed Mont Blanc, and this is despite the fact that he spoke very little English and no French at all. That was back in 1964. The next year, he joined the Japanese expedition to the Himalayas. This was the famous ascent of the Cho-Oyu. And in the years that followed, he wandered around the world with little money, and he just apparently looked for bigger mountains to climb. In 1966, he found himself in Africa, where he climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya. And the next year, he climbed Mount Sanford in Alaska. And the year after that, he was down in Argentina and climbed sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my paper here, the Aconcagua, which is the highest mountain in the Andes. The same year, he floated on a wooden raft down the Amazon from its source to the mouth of the river, which I think is incredible.
Yes, indeed. And what did he do next? What happened after that?
Well, next was his famous, his first ascent of Everest. Uemura joined the Japanese expedition, they were making a reconnaissance of the southwest face. That was in '69. He returned the next year. And that was the year that the expedition split in two. One group attempted to climb the difficult southwest face, and the other climbed the South Col route, which was easier. And Uemura joined the latter group. And as you may know, the members of the Southwest Face party didn't make it, but the South Col party eventually did. Anyway, the same year, he traveled to Alaska again to climb Mount McKinley. And so this made Uemura, the first man to get to the highest point of 5 different continents.
Yes. Wasn't he a member of that ill-fated International Everest expedition in 1971?
Yes.
The one that failed because of all those arguments that happened between all the members.
That's right. Yes, but they didn't. They failed also because the weather was pretty bad. Uemura and his partner, for some reason, had to carry the supplies for the British pair, who insisted that they would do all the exciting climbing for themselves. So obviously there was a bit of resentment there.
Yes, no doubt that must have made him quite determined to just concentrate on solo expeditions after that.
Yes, apparently.
That experience. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I know that he's gone solo since then. In 1974, he set off in the middle of winter to cross the North American continent from Greenland to the Bering Straits by dog sled, which was an incredible idea in the first place. That's a distance of 12,000 kilometers. Yeah. And, of course, this was totally by himself. The only company he had were his dogs. Apparently he met people on the way, but, he was doing it all himself. And he traveled in the winter, and in the summer he rested. And it took him 2 years. Eventually he got to the Pacific in '76. Must have gotten a lot of reading done during the summer. Anyway, 2 years later, he found sponsors to finance a solo expedition to the North Pole. Supplies were flown in by plane, and he maintained radio contact with his sponsors, but he was completely alone out there. He was attacked by a polar bear. He nearly fell through the ice. It was incredible, but apparently he got from the northern part of Canada to the North Pole in 54 days. And the next year, not content with that, he crossed the entire Greenland ice cap, which is 2,250 kilometers, and it's part of some of the most bleakest terrain in the world.
Yes. And his dream is to cross the Antarctic continent alone, is it?
Yes. He's been preparing to try it. It's never been done before. But, if anyone can do it, I imagine he can. He's certainly determined. And he doesn't seem to mind the loneliness. Apparently he is a happily married family man. I don't know how he manages that. But anyway, if he can get permission and financial backing, there's really nothing to stop them. I guess after he does that, there won't be anything left for him to do.
Well, we'll see. Bob MacArthur, thank you very much.
It's all right.
Born Robert Zimmerman in Duluth, Minnesota in 1941, and raised in the northern mining town of Hibbing, near the Canadian border, American singer-songwriter Bob Dylan transformed the political protest chant, into personalized poetic anthems for the 1960s civil rights and anti-war movement. The descendant of Jewish immigrants from present-day Lithuania and the Ukraine, the young Dylan was inspired by the adventurous beatnik poets and writers of the 1950s and ran away from home many times as a teenager, traveling as far as New Mexico and California. Dylan learned to play the harmonica and the auto harp, and by 15 had written his first song, a ballad dedicated to Brigitte Bardot. He played in rock bands at school, and though, contrary to popular belief, his choice of name change had nothing to do with Welsh poet Dylan Thomas, he did love poetry and found rock lyrics superficial. Musical influences, Hank Williams, Muddy Waters, and Woody Guthrie, led him to develop his own more profound storytelling style of folk music instead. In the early 1960s, Dylan dropped out of college and hitchhiked to New York, where he played gigs in Greenwich Village. His urgent vocals attracted attention. One musician described him as like a dog with his leg caught in barbed wire. Dylan's physical image was just as intriguing, with his scruffy hair and serious expression. After a positive review in the New York Times, he signed with Columbia Records. His debut album, Bob Dylan, and its follow-up, The Free Willin' Bob Dylan, excited other major figures in folk, notably Joan Baez and the group Peter, Paul, and Mary, who both covered Dylan's track Blowin' in the Wind. Dylan's next album, The Times They Are A-Changin', cemented his status as a figurehead of the growing counterculture. In the mid-1960s, Dylan brought electric guitars into a performance at the Newport Folk Festival. Fans booed, and Dylan stormed off stage. Yet his subsequent half-acoustic, half-electric albums, Bringing It All Back Home and Blonde on Blonde, were massive hits. Dylan then began producing more personal music based on his own life experiences, although love songs such as It Ain't Me, Babe, describing the failure to live up to another's standards, were still political. The song addressed Dylan's discomfort with being labeled as a spokesperson for a generation. After an exhausting tour in the UK, he had a motorcycle accident that caused him to drop out of the music scene completely for several years. Dylan's later work saw experiments in style that were to meet with varying levels of success. Early 1970s albums were disappointments to fans, though his album Desire, which included the song Hurricane, which addressed racism and police brutality, was acclaimed. Dylan reemerged in the 1980s as a Christian, expressing his spirituality with the album Slow Train Coming, but then becoming associated with an ultra-Orthodox Jewish sect. When asked about his beliefs, he responded, "There's no way you're going to convince me this is all there is to it." Since the late 1980s, Bob Dylan has toured constantly. Even with 39 albums released, he still needs more than music. Dylan has been active as a painter, actor, and scriptwriter. He produced a poetry collection, Tarantula, and has written an autobiography, Chronicles. Dylan is also the object of much literary and musical analysis. He is the subject of the documentary Don't Look Back and Martin Scorsese's semi-fictional documentary Rolling Thunder Review. He famously won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2016 for having created new poetic expressions within the great American song tradition.
The Princeton Language Institute and Abby Marks Beale. 10 days to faster reading. Zip through books, magazines, and newspapers. Understand and remember everything you read. If you could have a personal genie grant 3 wishes, you might start by asking for $1 trillion and the power to fly. But some people, especially people who love to read but never have enough time to get through all the books they want to, might use one wish to gain the power to read with superhuman speed. There's no guarantee that these blinks will give you superhuman reading skills, but you don't need a genie to become a faster and better reader. You just have to learn how to shed some bad habits and practice a few techniques. 10 Days to Faster Reading explains that we can become faster readers in just 10 days. These blinks compile the best of the book's methods, tips, and examples. Start practicing them right away with your daily newspaper or any nonfiction material you might have lying around, and you'll be on your way to becoming a faster reader while remembering more of what you read. People put too much pressure on themselves when they read. Too much to read, too little time. It's a problem we can all relate to. Every day you find more interesting reading material, and every day the pile of to-read books grows taller and taller. But the problem isn't necessarily time per se. Rather, it's that you're not reading efficiently due to a few classic misconceptions about reading. First, you don't actually have to read everything in a book or newspaper to understand it. In fact, it's impossible to read everything that passes over your desk. Instead, you should get in the habit of selecting and prioritizing what's actually important. We'll come back to that point later, but as you'll see, it's quite easy once you know how to preview the material and efficiently determine the parts that actually interest you. Second, you don't have to remember everything you read to get something from the material. We develop this misconception about reading in school when we're under pressure to remember everything we read in our textbooks because we'll be tested on the material. However, memorized material is stored in your short-term memory and is forgotten after only a few days. If you want to retain the information for the future, you'll need to create an easy retrieval system. Try writing down the crucial information electronically or on paper, or make highlights and notes in the margins. Then simply file the materials away. This way, you can find the information easily, and it will also take away the pressure of memorizing everything. Finally, people have the misconception that they shouldn't be reading during working hours. However, the opposite is true. Reading is actually part of your job description. Business people tend to think that they'll appear to be slacking off if they read on the job. Relevant reading materials, however, can help you come up with new business ideas, stay up to date on the market, and find ways to beat the competition. So, never be afraid to read at work. It's crucial. Becoming a more efficient reader is as easy as kicking a few bad habits. If you do something enough times, you form a habit around it, and the same goes for reading. So what are some of the classic bad reading habits, and how do you fix them? A common bad reading habit is passive daydreaming. While we read, we're thinking about a million other topics, none of which are related to what we're actually reading. Our goal should be to turn this inefficient noodling into active mind wandering, a type of thinking that connects the information we're reading to our own experience. This way, we bridge different types of knowledge, what we already know and the new information we'll learn. Making the switch is as easy as steering your thoughts in the right direction. For example, imagine that you're reading an article about Italian art. Allow your mind to wander to your trip to Italy last year. That connection works as a kind of brain glue to which you can easily stick new information. Another inefficient habit is regression, that is, rereading what you've just read. To avoid regression, try covering the text you've just read with a business card, leaving just enough space for the line you're reading. Regression is often little more than wasted time, but if you really don't get the author's meaning or come across a word you don't understand, it's indeed worth going back over the material. Finally, lots of people sub-vocalize as they read, mouthing along to the words they read or mentally whispering the text. Normally, the brain can process up to 400 words per minute, but when we read at talking speed, we only read about 150 words per minute. So if you simply stop sub-vocalizing, you'll be able to process more than twice as many words per minute. When you want to read for speed and stop sub-vocalizing, focus on the key words and skip over the rest. Another strategy is to mumble, hum, or chew gum while reading. These noises' rhythms will speed you up. You can read faster by taking shortcuts. So now you know the bad habits. But how can you become a faster, more efficient reader? Start by following these 3 simple steps. First, have a clear purpose in mind and a sense of responsibility for what you read. This will help both with organization and concentration. Choose what to read and what to skip over by asking yourself, why am I reading this? For example, if you want to improve your knowledge in a particular area or keep up to date with world affairs, then you can throw away the professional journals from 2 years ago. Then ask yourself, why do I need this information? It can be for a test, a meeting, or even to help your child do better in school. But if your child already has good grades, do you really need to read over their work every day? So before reading any material, ask yourself these 2 critical questions. If you can't find a good answer, don't read it. Second, preview all nonfiction material before actually starting to read in order to get an idea of what it's about, as well as which parts will be relevant and interesting to you. Begin by reading first the first few introductory paragraphs to get an idea of where the intro is heading. Next, read the subheadings, titles, and subtitles that are usually larger and bolded. Finally, read the first sentence of each paragraph in order to get a better idea of what each section is about. Previewing provides you with background information, and thus helps you read and comprehend the text faster while reducing the tendency to reread. Once you have the background information, you don't need to constantly reread to ensure you understood it correctly. Previewing alone will give you a big portion, 40% in fact, of the material's key information. The rest is just elaboration, explanation, or fluff. The third and final step is learning actual speed reading techniques, which we'll explore over the course of the following blinks. To speed up your reading, try only reading the key words. The third step in becoming an efficient reader is learning how to actually read faster. For most of us, reading training ended in elementary school, so our reading methods are quite outdated. These next blinks will provide you with new reading strategies that you can try out for yourself. Try them all and see which ones work best for you. The first technique involves focusing only on important words and skipping over the rest. When we read, our eyes tend to jump around in stops and starts instead of a smooth flow. Getting into a better flow is as simple as finding key words, which are the most important words in a sentence. Typically, they are longer than 3 letters and carry meaning. For example, try reading only the words emphasized in the next sentence. The task is defined by a series of steps and elements. See, you don't need to read the whole sentence to figure out the meaning, so just read the important words instead. Another strategy is to stop your eyes on thought groups instead of separate words. Imagine phrases as being separated by slashes. By looking for thought groups, you force your eyes to move forward faster while maintaining good comprehension. Comprehending the whole phrase at each stop will require you to use your peripheral vision. You can train your peripheral vision in a number of ways, such as by quickly glancing at phrases and trying to repeat them. Or if you're in a traffic jam, you can quickly glance at the license plate of the car in front of you and try repeating it aloud. Don't be surprised if your eyes feel strained as you practice these strategies. They're just getting used to a new rhythm. The more you exercise your eye muscles, the better. Other techniques you should try are reading between the lines and indenting. Here are a few more great tricks to becoming a better reader. One way to overcome the habit of sub-vocalizing is to focus on the white space just above each line. This way, you can still see the top half of the letters and can thus easily understand them without becoming fixated on the words themselves. The idea here is to move through the words without getting stuck on any. You can do this more effectively if you aren't looking directly at the words themselves. Another strategy, called the indenting method, involves using your peripheral vision. Instead of placing your eyes at the beginning of each line, try aiming them half an inch inside the left margin, and then stop reading half an inch before the right margin. You'll still be able to see the beginning and the end of the line using your peripheral vision. By not focusing on all the words, you reduce the number of potential starts and stops that occur while glancing over the lines. If your eyes are stopping 7 or 8 times per line and you can cut it down by only 1 stop, your overall speed can increase by more than 10%. This might feel unnatural for some. To help you get used to starting a line after it actually begins on the page, draw vertical lines about half an inch inside both margins. This way, you know exactly where to start and stop your eye movement. Relearning a skill that you already have can feel frustrating. Just stick with it. It's natural sometimes to get worse before you get better, and the rewards are definitely worth the frustration. Blink number 6. Use your hand or a pen to lead your eyes and create fast reading habits. When we learned to read as children, we always used a finger or another object to pace our reading and better understand the words. Why should we stop training that skill once we know how to read? We shouldn't, and in fact, it can be very helpful. Eyes naturally follow movement. For example, when there's a fly in the room, your eyes notice it immediately. Likewise, pointing and moving your fingers can be used to guide your eyes more quickly through a text. Simply place your finger to the left or to the right of a line, and as you read across the line, move your finger slowly yet steadily down toward the bottom of the page. When reading narrow columns like the kinds found in newspapers, you can place your index finger in the center of a paragraph just under the line you're reading. Move it either straight down or in the shape of a snake as you read across a line in order to guide your eyes. Next, cover the text you've already read in order to avoid regression. One way to do this is by using the business card method. Another requires only using your hand. Make a fist with your left hand and stick your thumb out to the side. Then just place your hand horizontally or vertically over the text you have just read. Just like the business card method you learned earlier, covering the text you've already read prevents you from rereading. These methods might be uncomfortable or even embarrassing, but they also help you develop fast reading habits. Just like training wheels, you can let them go once you no longer need them.
Speaking with an accent.
I think it's a great shame the way regional accents seem to be dying out in England, don't you?
I don't think they are. In fact, I think there's been a bit of a revival recently. I mean, maybe true of dialects, but not accents. In fact, the regional accent is socially acceptable in all walks of life now, I think. Think of the BBC. I mean, they have announcers and presenters with Scots accents. One of its political reporters has a strong Northern Ireland accent.
Yeah, you can't understand him very well, can you?
No, seriously, I think it's wonderful. There's such an enormous range of accents in your country. Britain is I don't know, about a 16th the size of the States, but it's got more variety, more vocal variety than America.
All Americans sound the same to me. I mean, they all
How do you mean?
they all pronounce R at the end of every word.
No, that's not true.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I mean, many British speakers do the same. You think of the West Country burr, and in Scotland there's a slight audible R at the end of words.
Oh, that reminds me. I heard about this strange experiment they did in New York City. Linguists wanted to find out if lower class and middle class people pronounce that R sound differently. So they chose these 3 department stores in New York. One was high status, and one was medium status, one was low status. And they found out what departments were on a particular floor. For instance, they went around asking all the assistants where's the toy department or the bookstore or whatever, and they were all on the 4th floor. And so the answer they got was always 4th floor.
I like that. Yeah. Well, the trouble is when you ask someone to pronounce something, they affect a high status pronunciation. Thinking that's the correct way to talk, I suppose. Certainly in the UK, the people with strongest accents are working class, I think, as in the United States.
I never thought about that.
You know what's strange is the way different sorts of accents, different sorts of sounds make you assume that people are slightly slow-witted or unintelligent, like West Country accents or Suffolk accent, because it's slow, a slow rural accent. But an urban accent like London or Liverpool just makes you sound uneducated. I mean, I know it's prejudice, but it's got something to do with what Ken's saying. But what I was trying to say is this the same in North America?
Yeah, probably to a lesser extent. I think there's a working class accent in New York City and Chicago, or pretty well any city, but especially the big cities.
Bronx,
you notice it. That's right. People talk like that, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything except that.
Do you have a rural accent the same?
Well, Yes, there are rural accents. I mean, you've probably heard, hillbillies in the South or, in the Midwest. But it's funny because a lot of the American presidents came from the South, like Johnson and Carter, and they get made fun of, really.
Yes.
Their accents, too.
What happened to me when I was in the States is people kept asking me to talk because they liked to listen to a British accent. I suppose it sounded sort of quaint to them. Waitresses in restaurants particularly.
Gee, I just love your
British accent. Yeah.
Mind you, an accent like yours or mine, RP they call it, don't they, can be a handicap in some situations in this country. I mean, people think you're stuck up or trying to be superior.
Yes, but in general, RP has high prestige.
But it's funny because RP, as you call it, is only spoken by a tiny minority of people who speak English as their first language. So why is it, tell me, that it's become a model for almost all every foreigner learning the language?
Yes, mainly in Europe. It's not so much in Asia and Latin America. But I think it has to do with the prestige of RP in the UK and the way it was the BBC accent for so long. BBC spans the world. And don't forget, RP, the accent of educated, middle-class southern Britain, was also the accent of teachers.
Yeah, that's true. And also, I mean, there has got to be some sort of standard, even if it's an artificial one. Otherwise, people get confused and there's no sort of norm to stick to, is there? I mean, I've never met a foreigner that doesn't speak with an accent, but a national one rather than a regional one. And that's sometimes really enchanting, and I don't think we'd want to change that.
Book review. Graphic novels. Iran, Drawn. Woman, Life, Freedom by Marjan Satrapi.
Covering the melee of missiles exchanged between Iran and Israel in April, many newspapers, including this one, used a similar photograph. It was of a woman wearing a hijab and walking past a mural depicting Iranian rockets. The choice summed up the things for which Iran's thuggish theocracy is best known: saber-rattling and controlling women. These are also the two things that most enrage ordinary Iranians, who think that the money spent on rockets would be better used to shore up the country's crumbling economy. In 2022, women and men took to the streets after Mahsa Amini, a student who was picked up by religious police for wearing an ill-fitting hijab, was beaten until she fell into a coma and died. The widespread protests in response to her brutal treatment came to be called the Woman, Life, Freedom movement, a phrase that was chanted by protesters. The Kurdish Jin Jiyan Azadi was used by women in Turkey decades earlier. This is also the name of a new graphic novel conceived by Marjan Satrapi, best known for Persepolis, 2000, a memoir in graphic novel form that illustrated the oppression of Iran's regime. Nearly 24 writers, academics, and artists contributed. The 25 short chapters in the collection document the protests and the context around them. The broader aim is to introduce outsiders to the human side of Iran and to change perceptions of the country and its people. But the book is also designed to assure Iranians that they are not alone. A version in Persian has been put online and made available free. Woman, Life, Freedom offers an engrossing portrait of a population held back by restrictive leaders. There are iron-willed protesters who take to the streets despite the threat of arrest and beatings. But there are also everyday acts of resistance, from sharing a post on Instagram to going for a run or owning a dog, which some conservative lawmakers call morally depraved. Overt defiance is not the only story. One chapter revolves around a young woman grappling with whether to sign a forced confession to enable her release from prison. The government's economic mismanagement, pampered princelings, and censorship are also criticized. One panel depicts an official demanding the deletion of a downright immoral scene on TV of a woman eating a cucumber. Ridicule remains a potent weapon against oppression. The illustration would be comical were it not so disheartening. The subject of women's treatment feels especially timely given recent crackdowns by the morality police. The last chapter, which features a conversation between a few contributors, serves as a warning both to outsiders and to the government. The only thing that could strengthen the regime today would be if another country were to attack Iran, says Farid Vahid, an Iranian political scientist. But this regime will fail, replies Ms. Satrapi. Some things can't be held back. So, she hopes.
Sharpen your skills with this next listening session. Listen closely and snag every new word that floats by. Let's master your vocabulary. Unsheathe your inner voice and practice pronouncing each word. Craft a short sentence to acquire its meaning and lock it in your memory. Let's unleash your vocabulary potential.
Money and music. Can't get you out of my head. Maurice Ravel's Bolero is a song and saga that do not end.
Maurice Ravel's Bolero is a strange piece of music, consisting of 2 melodies repeated 9 times each. Originally the score to a ballet, it is catchy and keeps running in the listener's head long after it ends. Bolero, a new French biopic about Ravel's struggle to compose the work in 1928, also employs repetition. Anne Fontaine, the director and co-writer, returns to Ravel's tortured sexuality, fascination with mechanical noise, and slow mental deterioration. He died in 1937 of a brain disease. Neurologists think it may have been frontotemporal dementia, which is associated with obsessive repetition. Bolero is among the most famous tunes in classical music. The royalties it has generated from live performances, recordings, and film soundtracks are estimated at more than $100 million. The question of who got all that money is complicated. Ravel had no descendants. On his death, the copyright passed to Ravel's brother, who married his caretaker after a car accident. She then left the rights to her first husband, who married his manicurist. Ultimately, the copyright wound up belonging to that manicurist's daughter from a previous marriage, Evelyn Pen de Castel. Under French law, the piece entered the public domain in 2016. But much like the music, the copyright battle over Bolero just keeps going. In 2018, the heirs of Alexandre Benoit, the original ballet's set designer, sued SACEM, France's copyright agency. Ms. Pen de Castel also got behind the lawsuit. They argue that the ballet was a collaborative work, and that because Bronislava Nijinská, the choreographer, did not die until 1972, they are entitled to receive royalties until 2051. In June, a French court will decide whether they are right. Ms. Fontaine's film is not about money. It is about the man and his music. In 1928, Ida Rubinstein, a Russian dancer in Paris, commissioned Ravel to write a ballet. But he puts it off, obsessed by an unconsummated emotional affair. He flees to the seaside, attends parties, and visits brothels, where instead of sex, he asks a girl to put on gloves so he can listen to the sound. In flashbacks, viewers learn of his struggle to be accepted by France's stuffy musical academy and of his rivalry with Claude Debussy, another French composer. With Rubinstein's deadline approaching, Ravel plinks hopelessly at the piano. A vaguely Spanish pop song his housekeeper sings feeds into his melody. Some films might have treated this as a eureka moment, but Ms. Fontaine suggests various sources of inspiration. In another scene, Ravel takes Rubinstein to a factory to listen to the machines. The ballet, he says, should be an ode to mechanical modernity. The success of Bolero was immediate and enduring. Leonard Bernstein, the celebrated American conductor and composer, loved it. The credits of Ms. Fontaine's film claim it is played by an orchestra somewhere in the world every 15 minutes. It is hardly surprising that Ms. Pen de Castel wishes those performances were still earning her money. Benoit designed the ballet's sets and costumes, but never claimed to have had a hand in the music, says David El Sayeg, the deputy chief executive of SACEM, which deems the lawsuit nonsense. Though unlikely, if this lawsuit by long-distant heirs were to be successful, it could embolden others to sue over expiring copyrights. Ravel was ambivalent about Bolero, according to a protégé. He considered it his masterpiece, but also said that, unfortunately, there is no music in it. Yet Ravel might find it fitting that its story goes on and on. In the film, he asks a friend, "Don't you think there is something terribly insistent about this melody?"
You haven't told me about your holiday. How'd it go?
Oh, it was wonderful. Everything was perfect. Until the last day, that is.
Why? What happened?
I went down to the beach on my own and I decided to go for one last swim. I was lying on my back in the water, floating there without a care in the world.
Sounds wonderful.
It was. But when I decided to swim back, I realised I'd got caught in a current. And even though I was moving my arms and legs, I didn't seem to be getting anywhere. I started to feel really tired.
Wasn't there anyone around?
No, that was the thing. I was so far out that no one would have heard me.
Oh dear, what did you do?
Well, it gets worse. I started to get cramp in my legs and arms, and my head went under a couple of times.
Oh, how horrible.
I panicked. I know they say you should never panic, but I could just feel the water dragging me under.
So how did you get back?
I was just about to go under for the third time when I heard the sound of a motor. Some people in a small boat had seen me and they pulled me out, just in time too.
That was lucky. How do you feel about swimming now? Have you been back in the water?
No, I'm too scared. I'm frightened to even go in a swimming pool now. I still have dreams where I'm being pulled under the water and I feel like...
We'll see you next time for more exciting and helpful videos to help you master your speaking fluency through our listening sessions. Thank you for being with us.